Corey is going to be talking about N days. It's not K days, it's N days. And Corey, take it away, buddy.
Thanks, Deb. So if you scan QR codes, or you can also go in the slides-resources channel on Discord, you can see the slides, which is basically a website with commands and all kinds of good stuff you can copy and paste. So let's start with the old intro. Who is talking? My name's Corey Ham. I'm a red teamer, middle manager, data hoarder, podcaster, cat foster, and many other things. I've worked at Black Hills since 2021, and I've been a pen tester since 2013. So I'm very jaded, and I've had a lot of experience in the offensive side of things. At Black Hills recently, for about a year now, I've been heading up our continuous penetration testing team, which we call the Anti-SOC. Basically, we kind of morphed from red teams into more of a continuous offering. And as part of that process, I had left the world of vulnerabilities and end days and exploits. And I returned to that world and I said, wow, I thought we fixed this. We did not fix this. I thought that vulnerability management was pretty well solved, and it was not. So I kind of had to re-engage myself with the world of vulnerabilities and vulnerability management, and I'm deciding to share the knowledge that I gained with everyone. So I talked about this already, but there's certain persistent problems in cybersecurity. So passwords, they just keep coming back. No one has really figured out like how to fix this. It just keeps coming back as a problem. Security awareness just keeps coming back. People are going to get phished or social engineered some way or another. Vulnerability management is another one of those problems that just keeps coming back. So also, submit your ideas in Discord. I want to see what other persistent things people are, worried about. What keeps you up at night? I feel like over-reliance on EDR is one I hear from some of our clients. They're like, without EDR, we're screwed. Yeah, there's a few, there's problems. Let's see what the audience is saying. Convincing leadership. Yeah, that's a big one. So anyway, let's talk about end days. So for those that don't know, end days are basically known vulnerabilities. So it kind of contrasts or plays with 0 days. So 0 day is a previously unknown vulnerability, meaning like this is the first day, the 0th day that it's been in existence. N is like the number of days since a patch has been disclosed or a vulnerability has been disclosed. So an end day could be day 1 after a vulnerability, or it could be day 3000 after a vulnerability. It just depends. Overall, known vulnerability kind of implies that people know the vulnerability, but that's, I don't think, accurate. Like, just because it's an end day doesn't mean people know that it exists. Pretty much anything that's publicly disclosed can be considered an end day. So we'll talk about some specific like historical examples of previous end days and their life cycles, but just because it's been disclosed doesn't necessarily mean it has a patch or a fix. It's kind of, if each vulnerability that is disclosed, there's a process of the vendor being aware of it, patching it, developing workarounds, developing detections, all that good stuff. So I wanted to talk about a brief history of end days. So this is a graph. I kind of just made this up, as it says at the bottom. It says, this is my take, not based on any real data. The x-axis, or the let's see, that's the y. Basically, you can see here, difficulty of remediation is on the bottom, meaning as you go further to the right, it's harder to fix. And then impact is on the left, which is like how impactful it was. And then the size of them is my guess at the estimated financial impact. So you can see here, Eternal Blue. This is one most people probably know about. Someone in chat already said MS17010, which is Eternal Blue. This is, I think, the highest impact end day that ever was released. This is what WannaCry relied on. This is a huge impact vulnerability that was disclosed, and you'll see here, Eternal Blue was remote code execution vulnerability used by WannaCry to cause billions in damage. the patch came out on the 14th of March in 2017. The WannaCry attacks that caused billions of dollars in damage happened on May 12th, 2017, and then again on June 27th. So essentially, this is, a high impact vulnerability that was patched and fixed by Microsoft. Fun fact about the life cycle of that vulnerability is that it was actually discovered by the NSA like 5 years before it was ever publicly released. And it was, pressured by Microsoft to fix after it got leaked by shadow brokers. It's a whole thing, right? Someone asked in chat, Eternal Blue, where did that come from? Well, it caused blue screens. So that's what they called that. There's a few other ones on here. Heartbleed, people remember. I actually looked into this one for part of this talk. Heartbleed was a memory leak vulnerability used to obtain sensitive data. It was basically an open SSL memory leak. And the only victim really was the Canadian Revenue Agency. There was probably countless more vulnerabilities or people that were impacted by this, but overall, I don't think the impact, it's not like some threat actor was known to be using Heartbleed. However, it was patched and disclosed in April of 2014. As of 2017, there were 180,000 plus devices vulnerable on Shodan. And I just checked yesterday, and there's somehow still 180,000 devices vulnerable to Heartbleed. So I don't know how. I don't know how, but here's where we're at. Apache Struts. This was used to compromise Equifax. So you can see the life cycle. Patched March 10th, exploited sometime in May. So Proxy Shell. This was a famous Microsoft vulnerability used to compromise Rackspace late 2022. This is an interesting one because with Proxy Not Shell, they had applied a workaround, and the workaround was not effective in preventing the exploit. Spectre and Meltdown, those are the last two. There's also Black Energy. Black Energy was the ransomware type of attack that was used to take down the power grid in Ukraine for a short period of time. I put it at remediation very high. The CVE was actually an office bug, but the vulnerability or the malware itself utilized a ton of other end days, including a DOS vulnerability specifically for Siemens PLCs and other things. So basically, as we get up here on the right, let's talk about Black Energy. If they're trying to patch a Siemens PLC, that process is probably extremely difficult. Potentially replacing software or hardware on devices that are actually controlling the power grid. It's not just a super easy just run the patch. And I know that that's never really the case, that you can't ever just run the patch. But this is one where driving to a remote substation and running a patch is a lot harder than just running Windows updates on all your endpoints. And then lastly, I gave it the highest difficulty remediation and the lowest impact, which is the Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities, which Spectre and Meltdown are basically CPU-based hardware microcode vulnerabilities, which math, fancy science, essentially it leads to side channel attacks, memory leakage and stuff like that. The disclosures have started around 2017 and have continued to be released. So even last year or in 2022, there were more side channel attacks released and more fixes and more workarounds and hardware approaches and all that stuff. But basically, these end days have the fixes have performance trade-offs. You're going to lose 20% CPU or 30% CPU. I would say that fixes have been applied and then they've been later invalidated through research. Who knows what the patch level is? I have no idea. You can't just research how many devices are vulnerable to Spectre and Meltdown, but probably not very many devices have been patched. I would guess only cloud providers probably patch or actually apply side channel mitigations because they're sharing hardware between different sensitive environments. But the impact is also unknown. If I searching for this, I couldn't find a single example of someone using Spectre or Meltdown to do anything bad. So it's kind of one of those things, looking at this graph as a vulnerability manager or as someone, you're okay, I have to decide for each end day that releases where it falls on this graph. How hard is it to remediate and how much of an impact is there? So, and it's not like you always know that day one, but yeah. We do know also, kind of laying the land, in usage of end days is becoming increasingly uncommon. So this is the Verizon data breach report from 2023. I mean, they don't give an exact number here, but it's below 10% is categorized as exploit vuln. So this is below 10% of the breaches reported by Verizon actually were a result of an end day or an exploited vulnerability. Technically, this metric would also include 0 days. So we don't even know, but basically we could see here, creds is up at the 40-something% mark. Phishing is at the above 10% mark, and then exploit vuln is at the below 10% mark. So it's becoming increasingly uncommon. Reasons why? I think the industry at whole is getting better at vulnerability management. Now we're seeing dedicated vulnerability management teams are becoming increasingly common. Public disclosure is a pretty mature process. We have government support with CISA, MITRE. Like it's a thing that a lot of time and effort has gone into fixing, and I think we've actually done a good job. The other thing is that almost every product nowadays has a security integration. So, like as an example, you can see here, Cloudflare has security mitigations for a lot of end days. So if you use Cloudflare as a reverse proxy, you might already be protected from end days without you ever having to patch or fix or change anything. Also, next-gen firewalls do that too. Like they might just have mitigations built in for things like Cloudbleed or Heartbleed or things like that, and they just stop the attack at the perimeter. You never have to patch. You probably should still patch, but also endpoint products. Like we've seen mitigations for Eternal Blue being built into EDRs. So basically, end days are becoming less and less common. Also, as we'll talk about, finding and exploiting end days is sort of resource intensive for attackers, right? So it's way harder to go find an end day or a 0 day, build an exploit, weaponize it, get past the defenses, chain together a bunch of exploits versus just calling the help desk and saying, hey, I lost my credentials. I need to get into my account, which is what we're seeing attackers do now. They're just taking the easy way out, going for social engineering or valid credentials. And so that's why I think end days are sort of dropping in commonality. But just because they're uncommon doesn't mean they're low impact. See the chart above, right? These were all things that were, they might not have been common. There was maybe only one Microsoft 0 day or Microsoft end day of this level that year, but it led to the most damage that's ever been done to, the world, at least recently. Obviously, if you go back, you get into like Slammer or Configure or those other like previous malwares, but we're trying to stay sort of more in the modern era. So that's sort of the lay of the land with end days. And now we'll get into sort of some demo-ish stuff where we're talking about finding end days. So this is sort of a high-level overview of finding end days. There's a couple items here I put little asterisks because they're not covered in this talk. So the number one is have a vulnerability management team. If you can do this, you're off to a good start. We're not going to cover how to get a vulnerability management team in your company or for your company or for your target if you're like a pen tester. But we are going to cover knowing your environment and doing regular recon. Listening to your vendors. So if you have a vendor that's going to disclose vulnerabilities to you and issue patches, then you don't need to be scanning for vulnerabilities. I will say you don't necessarily need to, you should trust but verify, right? In general, relationships with vendors can be pretty tough. Cisco is one of the more famous ones that you have to have a support license and you have to have this. And there's a lot of things that can lead to Cisco devices being vulnerable because you don't have support or they're tough to patch. But in general, listening to your vendors is a good way. Usually, vendors, should be the first ones to tell you when there's an end day in your environment or in, one of your products. Scanning yourself regularly with a variety of tools. We're definitely going to cover that. We'll cover Shodan and Nuclei today, but there's so many more tools out there. There's Nessus. People are joking in chat, and we joked before the call that a lot of people will pass off, oh, we ran Nessus or Qualys, and that's all we did, and that's good enough, right? Also, follow the news. We do an Infosec news podcast. That's maybe where some of you know me. And that is a good way. Like, genuinely, I'm not joking. Every week after the news, I look at all of the different vulnerabilities we talked about, and I decide if I'm going to try to exploit any of them. So I'm gonna go through things like last week. I think it was the Go Anywhere thing. The Fortra file sharing program had some CVEs in it, and so I went out at looking for that Go Anywhere portal and saw if I could find it on any of our customers. Luckily, none of them had it. So let's do it live. I thought for this talk, I can talk until I'm blue in the face, but I think it's also cool to just show a live engagement. And instead of disclosing customer information, I decided to build it with the target of Uber. So Uber has a pretty wide open bug bounty program. It's actually really cool. And one of the things I would recommend, even if you're a pen tester, if you're whoever you are, read this scope of their bug bounty program. Basically, this is, in my opinion, probably the most flushed out rules of engagement that I've ever seen. They have everything from guidance, general guidance, like follow these terms, good faith security research, do this, all the way down to specific things like they have, we don't care about CSV injection. We don't care about, items with negligible impact. We don't care about missing cookies. We don't care about SSL TLS. We don't care about, so they have listed everything here that they care about. This is the first process of finding end days, is finding what end days actually matter. Because as we'll cover very quickly, you can go run almost any tool in any environment and it'll list thousands of CVEs that probably don't matter to anyone. But basically, take a look at this. If you're hiring pen testers, if you are a pen tester, read through this and ask yourself, how could I get my rules of engagement for my pen test to be this specifically, tailored to what I actually care about? To summarize, though, a couple of out of scope things that specifically apply to end days. Reports against Uber services that state that a particular software component is of a specific version and is vulnerable without an accompanying proof of concept. So this is like totally a common pen testing thing. Oh, Apache version 2.4.7 is installed in your environment. Okay. What does that mean? Can you do anything with it? No, we can't do anything with it. Okay. Like, thanks, I guess. So they also don't care about vulnerabilities as reported by automated scanning or enumeration tools without additional analysis, validation, or reasoning as to how such submissions have a demonstrable information, assurance, impact, and vulnerability. So basically this, I would say these are pretty good ideas if you're validating end days. Even if you're targeting a general pen testing like use case, validate your stuff. Prove why it's vulnerable. Prove why it matters. Show the impact. Definitely, I think HackerOne is sort of notorious for things getting shoved under the rug of being like, oh, we don't care about this. And then they get popped from it later or whatever. But in general, I think these are actually pretty good tenets. The TLDR, if you don't want to read the whole rules of engagement, don't break stuff and demonstrate the impact of what you find. Those are great things to live by when you're going after end days. So don't break stuff. That's obvious. If you break stuff, you're going to make people mad. You're going to, shoot yourself in the foot. You're probably going to get detected. It's not worth it. But also demonstrate the impact. So we'll talk about validating, endpoints or validating end days. But basically, another thing that's really cool that I want to show is that they actually provide, if you look at scope, they actually provide, and I wish all of our customers did this, they have an API that discloses their active infrastructure that you can just query, list domains, scope, limit, but give me 1,000 domains. Right now they have 5,951 domains that they apply as scope. So basically this is a publicly available endpoint that we can go to, pull down the scope that the fake customer has provided, and then scan it. So that's pretty cool. We'll also cover how to maybe find that scope on your own, but I'm just saying if a pen testing company if every pen tester got this, they would be so happy. Like if every pen tester got just like, here's an API that, gathers all of our scope and our domains. And oh, by the way, as we'll go into, it's not accurate. People have already kind of commented that on the in the Discord, but if you look at some of the IPs they provide as being in scope, we can actually confirm through scanning that they're not actually owned by Uber at this current time. So it's better than nothing, but we'll talk about validating things. So back to doing it live. Let's do some initial recon. As I said, they provide the scope, so that kind of makes our job so easy. The primary domain, so that's an important thing. When you're targeting a corporate environment, you need to know their primary domain. Usually the primary domain is the first Google, the first domain that comes back if you Google the company name. But some companies use different domains for their email and their website. They might have a landing page. So the best option for the primary domain is to get it straight from the client. So for Uber, it's uber.com. That's their primary domain. And you'll see in this API, there's thousands of other domains. There's Uber internal, there's Drive for Uber, there's a ton of other stuff. So let's grab the scope. These are some commands, if you'd like to try this on your own, of grabbing the scope. And basically they come in JSON format. You can use some JQ commands to filter out the actual domain names. So let's taunt the demo gods real quick and see if we can actually do this. Let me go to my VPS here. Please don't sue me. Oh, I already have this directory. Or I'll make a new one. Let me grab this. Hopefully it works. So I got this all domains. So it's JSON, garbage. So back to here. Let's run this JQ command that I hastily wrote with ChatGPT. Okay. First hitch. Here's our internet connection has been cut. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. It didn't work. We're just going to ignore that because I already have the files. But basically, we're downloading also the IPs, same thing. We're going to combine all the files into this attack surface. So spoiler, we're going to do the cooking show trick. We're going to go into this Uber directory that I already created that has all the files that I expect to have. What I'm doing for this attack surface is I'm literally just combining the list of IPs they provide, the list of domains they provide, and that's their attack surface. So let's look at it real quick. So here's the scope they provide, and there's tons of garbage in here. I actually had to filter this a little bit, including, they had what is this, right? _dmarc.ext.ut.taxi. Okay. There's, this is, let's see, how many lines is this? This is 9,400 lines. So it's a pretty big scope. So anyway, let's say, okay, we have scope. And I do want to say recon caveats. There's so much to recon. There's probably a whole separate webcast about that. But basically, my one piece of advice I want to throw out there really early is be very careful with targeting cloud IPs directly. As we'll see, let's look real quick. So just looking at some of these IPs, some of them are going to be Amazon IPs. So these 54 ranges. Yeah. So this is just a random one I picked. All of these 54.94 addresses fall within Amazon Data Services Brazil, apparently. You got to be careful with these cloud IPs. They change ownership constantly. I'm not going to get into the details of exactly how and why, but my advice is if you're targeting anything that's cloud-based, to use host names. So essentially going for, something.uber.com is way better than going for 54. Whatever. There's multiple reasons for that. One is IP ownership changes. The second is most of these sites are web applications, and web applications are unlikely to respond properly if you navigate directly to the IP address. So that's why I advise going, use the host names. And as I say here, there's hundreds of additional recon techniques. Here's some of my faves. IP NetBlocks API. This is a free API from Whois XML API. You can query by organization. So let's do that real quick. If we type search by company name, and then we type Uber, it only limits to 100, but this is all searching based on organization name. So this is the net name is Uber. We'll go into this a little bit on Shodan, but a lot of the time this is super easy to go out of scope. You got to be careful. But yeah, this is a free API. I think you might have to have an account to see it, but you can query it programmatically, and it's super nice. Some other tools I really like, Subfinder. We're going to get deep into the project discovery stuff, hopefully. And this is a tool that they have. It's basically all the different domain enumeration techniques you would use kind of rolled into one. So this is primarily for finding subdomains, which are like velociraptor.uber.com or corndog.uber.com or whatever it is. That's what this tool does. Recon NG, obvious shameless plug, have to use that. Amass, that's another one of my favorites. This is kind of a lower, maybe lesser known thing, but you can pull other domains registered inside of a tenant from AAD internals. So if you have PowerShell, you grab AAD internals, you can go and query all the registered domains and grab a list of, other domains registered to that tenant. For Uber, I think there's like 5 of them. It wasn't that many. And this domain research suite, again, from Whois XML API, I think you, again, have to have an account for this, but it lets you, there's other ones too. I think it's called Woxy or UDNS. So this is one you can do like, reverse Whois. This is great, like at uber.com. So here's a bunch of domains that have uber.com in their registrant contacts. So, NV needs uber.com. NV needs super uber. There's lots of NV needs Ubers. And you'll see most companies, they have thousands and thousands of domains. Most of these are just going to be like landing pages, but another great technique for finding more attack surface. So now we have this scope. Great job. We did a great job. We grabbed the scope from their API. Now let's talk about another let's do like a silent pen test. That's what I call it. So, I have this insert cliche quote from Art of War. I must have forgotten to do that, but Shodan is easy, it's cheap, and it's an industry standard baseline. So for those that don't know, if you ask CISA for a pen test, this is basically what you're getting. You're getting a Shodan pen test. Shodan is excellent for checking your work. If Shodan found something that you didn't find, you need to improve your recon or gathering or pen testing procedures. I'd also like to mention for red teamers or other people that are focused on covert operations, Shodan is quiet. Like you could genuinely do a fully passive pen test with Shodan. They even have a scanning function where you can dedicated scan things without setting up any complex tooling. So basically Shodan is cool. Shodan membership, it's $50, one-time fee. It gets you most of what you would want. Goes on sale. And if you have an .edu email, you can get upgraded to have certain tags and filters and things that you don't get with the base account. For scanning and other things, there are paid accounts that start at $350 a month and go up from there. So essentially, I just have the $50 account. That's what I'm going to use. So here's some query examples. So they provide a reference page on their site that show, some cool stuff you can do. You can search for Apache. You can search for, I guess, somehow strict. You can search for headers. You can search for generic strings. You can search for ports and screenshots and all that good stuff. But these are the 3 searches that I recommend you do for recon purposes or for, I guess, end-day validation purposes. Oh, and just so everyone knows, Shodan searches are wildcards by default. So if I do HTTP title Apache, it's going to match everything with Apache in it. It's case insensitive by default. So as an example, let's grab, I'm going to have to log in. I just realized I didn't log in on this. So Let me pause my share real quick. Talk amongst yourselves. All right, we're in. We hacked it. So let's do this Uber search. We just type in Uber, we search, and here's what we got. So you'll see immediately the first result. Does this look like it's Uber? It looks like it's highlighting this. So it picked it up from a header called Uber-trace-ID. Now, that actually could be Uber related because they have a potential, custom header that they're using. But essentially, the reason I did this search is because these searches that are not scoped to any field are super generic. These are just like it's found as something called Uber. It has nothing about who, it has nothing about who owns it. It has nothing about who, it's really not necessarily Uber. It's just the string Uber. So as I say, it's prone to false positives. If you don't give a field, it'll search all the fields. HTML content could have Uber in it. But let's also search for maybe a more specific, let's search for one of the domains they provided in their scope, uberinternal.com. So uberinternal.com, this is actually, now we're kind of getting somewhere. These is very small number of results. As you can see, let's look at one of these results. Let's just click a random one. So this is a scan that Shodan generated of this AWS IP address. As you can see, it says cloud provider Amazon, domains Amazon AWS, but then it also says uberinternal.com. Now these host names, this first one is the reverse, IP address. If you know what reverse DNS is, that's what this is. The second one is grabbed from the SSL certificate names. So essentially, these are grabbed from the SSL certificate. They also have this nice little enrichment for, it's got a Jira instance on it. Okay, good to know. Oops. Let's keep scrolling when I don't want it to. Basically, it also has open ports. So you'll see here, there's an Nginx service listening on 80, and there's an Nginx service listening on 443, and that's it. You can see here, this is the CN. That's why it picked it up as uberinternal.com. Some of them will have screenshots. I don't really know exactly why. Some of them do and some of them don't. But yeah, this is a Shodan scan of a host. There's also organization specific searches. So you can search for org:'Uber, and org is actually based on who is data. So, who is organization names. So as we found earlier, who is organizations are not always super useful. Let's look at these top organizations here. The first one is Uber Technologies, Inc. The second one is Uber Group Limited. The third one is Uber Wireless LLP. So Uber Group Limited. Do we think that's actually Uber? I'm just going to Google it. Done in Bradstreet. Seems legit. Oh, this has a 10-second JavaScript delay. No, we're not doing that. Uber Group Limited. It's based in England, incorporated on July 10. I mean, who knows? I have no idea if this is actually, I will say I did find out last night that there's an ISP called Uber. So I don't know, maybe it's this. Uber, Northland's supplier of wireless broadband for New Zealand or whatever. So you get the idea. This is easily possible to go out of scope. You should know that their actual whois name is Uber Technologies, Inc. And we can find this by doing something like this. Who is Uber.com? Uber.com. So let's look at their domain registration. Here's their organization that registered Uber.com. Uber Technologies, Inc. That's their whois handle. So that's the one that's in scope. The other ones are probably other random companies. So just something to know. If you search Shodan, you could be going out of scope if you're not careful. This is my third search that I put in this. The SSL cert subject CNs. So we talked about, grabbing the CNs from SSL certificates. This is really handy. I strongly recommend you do this. You can see it's not as many results as you might expect, but this is all of the SSL certificates that have the subject star.uber.com. So these are wildcard certificates. And this wildcard does actually get evaluated by Shodan. So you can see here, this was issued to, maybe you can't, discover-dish-static.uber.com. This is a random site that Shodan found for us that otherwise we would have had to scan Google, which we're not going to do, and find this. So it's a great way of finding additional cloud resources that the target has in scope that you might not have known about because you weren't going to nmap or scan all of GCP. And I recommend you do these searches for all the domains they give. So, Uber internal. Let's do that one. And there's so many more root domains that we're not going to go into, what was it? Uber, NV needs Uber or whatever. So, this is more potential. Now we're getting a little interesting, right? Chef automate. And this is basically the process of end days. This is interesting. This is like a manual investigation though. This is going to take forever to go through all 2,000 hosts. You will also note, let's not get too off track, but some of these sites, it will actually report CVEs for things that it knows. So it will actually say, I'm looking for one specifically. I'm not finding any CVEs on Uber's Shodan site, but basically, Shodan has limited ability to find vulnerabilities. Let's see if I can find anyone that has it. Let's see, Uber Technologies. Let's click on that. Let's view this report. I've never actually done this. It's probably really cool. So, okay. So looking at this, it says vulnerabilities, no information available. So it hasn't found any vulnerabilities. But if you search your company and it says, CVE 2017, whatever, probably something to look into. As we'll go into more detail later, if Shodan finds it, you've got you really should do something about it in most cases because Shodan does not have scanning for a lot of different CVEs. So exporting results, you can export results in JSON on the web interface. You can just type, click report or whatever, and it'll email you a link. But I strongly recommend using the API. You can download data. So, we can do this real quick. I think my key is basically expired, but let's run this command. So there you go. I had already installed and initialized the Shodan, but this is like an apt-get. It's super easy. You can also grab it from PyPy or other Python sources. So yeah, SSL cert subject star.uber.com. We exported this. It comes as a gzipped JSON, which is kind of annoying, but they actually have a built-in parser to parse their own output. So, oops, I copied the wrong thing. So let's run this. Shodan parse, and then the file we downloaded, fields, IP string, host names. So, here's the IP that Shodan tagged, and here's the host names. So you can see here, this is just uber.com. This is that discover-static.uber.com. And you can, filter, grab out whatever hosts are relevant to you. I think there's a host for vulns. Okay, yeah. So, okay. So now we're getting into vulns. So according to Shodan, eqn-uber.com.br is vulnerable to CVE 2023-44487. So let's look into this real quick. This is a live end day. Oh my gosh. Looking at the references, let's click one of these. What could go wrong? Okay. Let's go back to our actual browser. Okay. Yeah, this is a DDoS attack. So yeah, HTTP2 fast reset. Let's go back to our rules of engagement. And I believe that Uber specifically says they don't care about denial of service attacks. Let's see. Let's go here. Let's search for denial. Do not perform denial of service attacks or related tests. So it's out of scope. I will say, even if it was in scope, I don't see how you would use this. You would have to chain it with other vulnerabilities. In general, for pen testing, you're not going to want to try DDoSes or any DOSes. DDoS implies you have like a botnet behind you. That doesn't really make sense, but basically, don't cause a denial of service. It's not going to get you anywhere. You know, you're not going to ask for a ransom payment to restore services or whatever. So just don't do it. So yeah, the Shodan CLI, highly recommend that. You can't do bulk searches. So you can't search for like input list of files and search that. But you can just bash loop it. So like that's what I would recommend doing. Like if I was doing a pen test for Uber, I would go through that scope file and I would bash loop every single scope item into Shodan, and I would search it and extract the results for every single one. Especially if you're not going to do that, especially at least do the domains. So do like SSL, CN, star.uberinternal.com. Like this, do that for the root domains. That's like a very easy win that will get you good results. And lastly, some Shodan caveats. The list of CVEs is small. So they're not scanning for, like as an example, the recent Citrix bleed. Shodan didn't do any scanning for Citrix bleed. If you go and search vuln 2023, this, I think it might be Citrix bleed. But basically, if you go and search for that vulnerability on all of Shodan, they never found any host that had it. And that's obviously not super accurate. We know that there were thousands of hosts vulnerable to that. Also, their data updates once a week, which is actually really often. But you should know some organizations might have countermeasures in place to prevent them from being scanned by Shodan. This is a key thing to remember, because last night, or a couple days ago, I searched every single IP that Uber listed in scope, and there were like maybe 20 that had results. So that tells you either they have a bunch of public IPs with private services that Shodan can't scan, or they're somehow blocking it or whatever. So basically, like, know the source of your data and know the value of your data. This isn't necessarily just a free pass to know everything about a host. They actually do cover a lot more ports than you might expect, but there's ways to block it, etc. So that's all I had for Shodan. And I will say you can get quite far with Shodan. You can get most of a pen test with Shodan. You will probably have to do some manual validation, but you can get pretty far. So lastly, and I know we're kind of pressed on time, we're going to get into Nuclei. So Nuclei, for those that don't know, if you're familiar with it, awesome. If you're not, I highly recommend Project Discovery and all of their assorted tools. They have a ton of tools. They have a port scanner. They have an HTTP URL enumerator. They have Subfinder. That's the domain enumeration tool. They have tools for almost any NDAY-based use case that you can use, and they're really powerful. Installing Nuclei, this takes a second, so I already did it. But you can either just pull down the binary release. This is for Linux, or you can, install it from source. Obviously, this will build it from like the latest source. Nuclei updates a lot. Almost every day, they're putting new code into the repo, or every week. So it will actually self-update when you run it, and I'll show you. So if I run Nuclei -up, it will actually update itself. So luckily, I'm already updated to the latest version, but it has self-updating built in, which is super nice. It won't auto-update every time you run, but it will pull new templates every time you run. So let's talk about running Nuclei. So this is the command that I give as sort of run Nuclei with default scans, with default options. We're going to input the attack surface that we generated above, which is just a list of IPs and a list of domain names. And we're going to give it, this TAC-O is the text output. This is what that looks like. And then this -ME is the markdown output, which that's what that looks like. So this is running Nuclei with fully default options. There's a ton of options in Nuclei that you can get into. But what you should know is that the output looks like this. So this is the template ID, email extractor. This is the protocol. So the protocol is over the HTTP protocol. This is the severity level, which is informational. This is the host it founded on, which is corndog.uberinternal.com. And then this is the data that the template extracted from the target host. So in this case, this is extracting an email address from a web page, which is kind of cool. Could be useful. But in this case, grab this trusted identity login services -group, which is the longest email ever at uber.com. This is what the markdown output looks like. I just pasted the markdown file. It will create markdown files for every single scan that it runs. So, or every single output. So there could be, 10,000 results of 10,000 files. This is what the reports look like. And if you're thinking this is 10 times better than Nessus, I'm thinking the same thing. It says this plugin matched at this site. Here's the protocol. Here's the full URL, timestamp, some information about the template, and here's the exact request it issued. Here's the exact response it got, which you can see in here. This is the email, and this is why it extracted it. And then it also has this extra information. So the actual extracted results and the curl command you can run to replicate this. This is amazing. You can literally just replicate something with a curl command on the target that it originally found it on. This makes validation of vulnerabilities way faster. Obviously, this isn't going to apply to everything. Not everything has a curl command. You can validate it. But this makes triaging end days super quickly. You can, this is amazing. And it's free, by the way. I guess I didn't say that. Nuclei is open source. It's free. You can also run templates by severity. So you can run this is saying, I only want to run critical severity templates. This is Uber's attack surface, and this is the command outputs that I said before. And as I said, this is amazing. I don't know why Nessus somehow doesn't have that. Running specific templates. So I mentioned last week we were going after the I'll verbally talk through sort of the process of going after the go anywhere end day. So let's just Google this. It's already in my browsing. So Fortra Go Anywhere MFT authentication bypass deep dive. So this is disclosed on January 23rd. This is a critical, we talked about this on the news. This is a big deal. We know the Clop ransomware group has already targeted this particular product, Go Anywhere, which is an MFT product who, if those that don't know, MFT is managed file transfer, meaning all the bad stuff is on here. This has already been patched, and this goes into a deep dive of all the different sort of, why it's vulnerable, how it's vulnerable, it's an auth bypass, indicators of compromise, all that good stuff. But here's the thing. I don't even know if any of our clients or maybe my target has Go Anywhere to begin with. So let's Google Nuclei templates and hope this. So templates are basically, if you're familiar with Nessus, templates are plugins. So templates are things that you run on a target that find vulnerabilities. So this is the list of public and repo enabled templates. So if we go here and we search for that CVE, what was it, 2020? Oops, 2024. Search for this. Okay. So there's some commits and there's some pull requests. So that right now, there's not a template that's live. Okay. Let's look at some PRs. Looks like okay. So look, someone, this is a great example of how vulnerabilities have life cycles. So this is recently released and someone is working on, this is not, looks like this isn't actually merged. Let's see, merge commit into main. Looks like it was merged. So here's where we are. This is a Nuclei template that finds this CVE and checks for it. So I won't get into too many details on these templates. They're really easy to make, and I actually have some examples in my notes. But essentially, what they say is we're going to make a request. We're going to check for this this looks like a path traversal vulnerability, and then we're also going to check if this string exists on the result page. And if those two things exist, we're triggering this as vulnerable. So let's see, why did this not get merged? well, I don't know. But let's grab this. Let's grab the contents of this template and let's throw them into a file. So this, I just pulled off of GitHub, and let's run Nuclei real quick. Let's see, like, if we find this, I'm like really scared, but let's just hope we don't. Let's see, Nuclei-L, Uber attack surface. I'm actually going to do the HTTPX. There is a chance we actually find an NA on Uber during this live web stream. I really hope that doesn't happen. -T custom templates. All right. Hope for the best. I'm not outputting any data. We're just going to hope while that's running. So if anyone doesn't know what we're doing right now, we are literally checking Uber for an end day. That's what we're doing. And this is how easy it is. I just went on GitHub and found a template that checks for this end day. And now I'm going to run it against Uber and see if they happen to have this end day. I will say I checked last night, and there is at least one Go Anywhere MFT that's exposed. But it doesn't appear to actually be in scope. It's like well, we'll get into it. But for those wondering, this is the attack surface. I used a slightly different file. I feel like I don't have time to go fully into details, but this HTTPX tool essentially grabs URLs from IP addresses and host names. So you need URLs. You can't just scan, velociraptor.uber.com for this vulnerability. You need to know, like, is it HTTP? Is it HTTPS? What port is it on? So this tool is built in Nuclei and will automatically grab sort of the actual URLs. So let's let that run and go back to our talk that we're doing. I wanted to say some important notes about Nuclei's default behavior. Don't discount the unknown severity. Unknown gets things like API keys and credentials are reported as unknown severity. So definitely check that out if you run Nuclei. I talked about the HTTPX already, but basically this tool will be executed by default on a target, but it will only check for 80 and 443, which are the default ports. So as an example, if you want to find vulnerabilities on corndog.uber.com:8080, you have to either run HTTPX manually with additional ports and supply that as your target list, or you have to run a separate port scanner and do it separately. So as an example, you can use Nabu, which is, again, Project Discovery has a free port scanner. You run that with the top 100 ports or whatever. You grab the ports from that, then you put that into HTTPX. And then now you have an attack surface. So you can see here, the default HTTPX output yielded like 4,500 URLs. The Nabu output yields 8,800 URLs. So that's almost twice as many URLs if you do like port 8080, 8443, all that good stuff. Templates, we talked about the templates a little bit. Creating custom templates. This is an example of one that I made last night. There's a burp add-on. You can select text in a burp window and create a template based on it. So it's pretty easy. I mean, there is you have to validate it and verify it, but you can create a template from Burp Suite pretty easily. This is what I made last night, super easily. It just runs a GET request to the URL, which is what was provided as input. And then it checks for this header, which is the X Uber header. So I actually found that Uber has custom headers that they use for most of their apps. So if we run that X Uber detector on their environment or on a random environment, we might find, oh, Uber has applications deployed in this environment. So it's an example, it's informational severity. So it wouldn't be something, it's not an end day, but it is an example of, like, if there was an end day that had this header, that, like, if this header is present, that indicates that there's an end day. Well, this is a super easy way to build a Nuclei template that would find that end day super quickly. Let's see if we found any end days. Okay. Whew. No results found. So luckily, we don't have to get in touch with Uber Hacker 1 and explain how we found on a webcast an NDAY, and now there's like X number of people that are trying to exploit an NDAY on Uber. I did want to say, though, that there is an MFT portal, and Go Anywhere MFT portal. It must be patched, so let's check that real quick. You can run --ID, and then I think it's Go Anywhere MFT login. So let's run that real quick. So this is me specifying a template that is Go Anywhere MFT login. This is just checking. It's not checking for the vulnerability. It's just checking for the product. So this is, I think, a good starting point, especially because that template that we ran was just some person's, like, it's not really verified. We want a place we can check it against. So this is just an informational severity grabbing. This is where this template exists, or this is where this login exists. And this is really good to just have sort of an awareness of what different products your target might have. So if this hits at all, we'll know that Uber has Go Anywhere, which is good to know. They might use a different product for MFT or a different product for, there's tons of stuff we'll identify. Citrix interfaces, NTLM interfaces. Okay, so here we go. So this is the one I was looking at yesterday. So this is HTTPS 54, and I don't know why, but it's like on 80 different ports. Maybe this is default behavior of Go Anywhere, but let's check. What's the default port? Probably, let's just grab this, HTTPS. Okay, back to Chrome. Let's go to this. Okay. So we went to it directly based on IP. Oh, on port 144, apparently. Let's go on 443. Okay, we went to it directly based on IP. Oops. I don't know why it says cert authority invalid. This could be legitimate. Let's keep going. Okay, it doesn't appear to be showing any content. Let's go back. Oh, I see. You have to go to /go anywhere /auth. So many random ports. This is super weird. I'm just going to go to 10,000. Okay, so, I mean, like, maybe this is Go Anywhere. I don't know. This looks like a false positive to me, right? Like, this is not. Let's see. Let's look at the certificate. Okay, so this is, remember how at the beginning of this I said be careful with cloud IPs? So for those that can't see it, this CN on this site is temp.accounts.state-manufacturing.co.il. So this is IL Illinois? So this is like some random web-hosted Illinois MFT. So like, this is a great example of how scope matters. Like, this IP was provided by Uber as being in scope, right? Like, this IP was, they gave us this, like the client gave us this. They said, hey, this is in scope. 54.177.1.21.26 is in scope. And we're like, okay, it's in scope. And we scanned it. And then it turns out it's actually a cloud IP that's allocated to Illinois or whatever. So like, that's why I said, be careful scanning things based on IPs. And if you'll look at the IPs, honestly, if I was targeting Uber during a pen test, I would just rip out all the IPs and I would go based on host names only. I would go based on, only something.uber.com or something.uberinternal.com. Okay. So anyway, I know we're kind of running close on time, but let's run through this super quick. Exploiting NDAYs. Sometimes Nuclei will just walk up to you and say, hey, here's an NDAY. And you'll be like, thank you, Nuclei. And then you have to, investigate it. What is this? Look at the markdown output. It gives the report. It gives the references. These are super handy. Look at the curl request. Maybe you can replicate it. Maybe, what verb does it use? What protocol does it use? What port is it on? All that good stuff. And then build an exploit yourself. Usually, I strongly recommend tracing it back to the original disclosure. So go back to the person who found, discovered it, disclosed it, or sometimes it's a vendor, but usually there'll be a page like this where this company, Horizon3.ai, has disclosed, a vulnerability. It's not like he gives you a Python script that says, here's how to run it, but it gives you a lot more information than Nuclei probably would. And then, yeah, look for discussions. Look for threads on GitHub issues, Reddit, Twitter, wherever else you find your, discussions of end days. And sometimes you won't be brought one. You'll have to go find it yourself. That example of, I didn't actually know when we started this webcast that there was an CVE and everything for that. So yeah, exploitation depends on the vulnerability. Most of these nowadays have long chains. And I know we ran super long on time, but I guess if anyone has questions, I'll do my best to quickly answer them. But yeah, thanks for listening to me rant about end days for a hot second.
Well done, Corey.
Yeah.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask it. Corey, if you could sum up the entire hour into like a sentence or two, what would you say?
I would say friends don't let friends get compromised with own vulnerabilities.
It's a good t-shirt.
That's the truth of it. Like, seriously, the reason I care about this is because every single person in chat or whatever can go download Nuclei, run it against their company and be like, hey, we're screwed. Like, it's that easy. It's not that hard. And it makes us all more secure and makes us all better. So yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Nobody, Nate, summed it up well. Use Shodan and Nuclei is better than Nessus. That's basically it.
Nobody, Nate. Nice. All right, Kelly, do you have any questions? Did you see any that Corey maybe missed?
I saw there's a bunch in Q&A. I wasn't sure.
So Corey, would Nuclei, I have a quick question. Would Nuclei be, if I tried to install it on my work computer, would my work security team get wigged out?
Probably not, but they might ask why you're scanning, vulnerability scanning from your endpoint. Yeah, like we didn't talk about infrastructure, but I ran everything from like a cloud from DigitalOcean or whatever. So, that's what I'd recommend. Run it from, don't run scanners. I will say, for the AppSec people, Nuclei does also support proxying. So you can like proxy it through Burp and have a ton of stuff. But basically, don't do that.
Basically, don't do that. You can, but don't. Is it possible to save the Notion notes within their own Notion workspace for future reference? That's
a good question. I can maybe try enabling that. Let me stop my screen share.
Sounds a little dangerous.
I think I can do a thing where I allow you to clone it.
Okay. Awesome.
Allow duplicate as template. Whoever asked that question, I just checked the box for allow duplicate as template. So maybe you can do that now.
Chelsea Ray. Anything else, Kelly? A lot of thank yous, Corey. A lot of informative session.
You're all welcome.
Awesome.
Go forth and hack things. Nuclei is pretty good at not taking things down, but your AppSec team might ask why, or your blue team might be like, why are there so many API requests coming in? Like the request graph will be like boop, very high when Nuclei is running. So it can cause loss of it can cause resource exhaustion if you run it hard enough, and you can rate limit it and all that stuff.
Kelly, can you look at that question in Q&A and see if that is applicable to ask Corey? I'll let you decide. It's the one at the very bottom. Other than that, if anyone has any questions, now's the time.
I'm in Discord too. I live here. So
yes,
hit me up.
Corey, I'm gonna tag you.
Hey, Corey, that link that you put in Discord for your Notion works like a charm.
Nice.
Cool.
Hey, so those of us who are trying to build upon webinar after webinar, is out of curiosity, is Rust in your toolkit?
It is not. And after I watched Matt's, I was like, I need to start building things in Rust. I personally tend to build things in Python or Golang. But Rust just is awesome. And I need to, maybe the next tool I write, I'll build it in Rust.
Good to know. I'm glad to hear a smart person was inspired by Matt's presentation too.
I
wouldn't go that far.
Another smart person. That was very kind. All right, everyone. I think we're going to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for joining us on another Black Hills Information Security webcast. Corey, if you have any questions for him, he'll be around. He's just around. He's always around.
Thanks for coming. Hack all the things. Make the world more secure. Don't let your friends get compromised with old malware.
Yeah, all the things. All right, Ryan, you know what to do. You have one job. Kill it. Kill with fire. Kill it. Bye, guys.